Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjan Yashoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjan Vanacha Vanacha Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodandana Vraja Jana Ashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Tira Vanacha Yamuna Tira Vanacha Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Ram Hare Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Rama Ram Hare Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Shri Radhe Jaya Radha Giridhari Radha Giridhari Shri Radhe Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya
And he was reading of the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. Please let me know if sound's coming through okay or if it isn't.
Yes, it's okay, Prabhu. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So I'll just start reading the paragraph. So despite his plans to settle down and begin the monumental task of translating Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhaktivedanta Swami was ready to preach in other ways also. In October of 1959, he had encountered a news article in the Times of India. 2 American scientists had received the Nobel Prize in physics for discovering the antiproton. According to one of the fundamental assumptions of the new theory, the article read, there may exist another world or an anti-world built up of antimatter. The other world reminded Bhaktivedanta Swami of the eternal spiritual world described in Bhagavad Gita. He was well aware that the scientists were not speaking of anti-material in the sense of eternal or spiritual, but he thought of using the scientific terms to capture the interest of scientific-minded people. He conceived of an essay presenting the theistic science of Bhagavad Gita in terms of the antimaterial particle and the antimaterial world. There was a time when the whole world was talking of space travel. Indian news media had reported the Russian Sputnik 2 years ago, and the race for space had begun. Seizing on the current interest in space travel, Bhaktivedanta Swami described how by Bhakti Yoga the soul can travel past the farthest reaches of space to the eternal planets of the spiritual world, where life is blissful and full of knowledge. He gave his own fresh translations of Bhagavad Gita verses, couched in the language of the new physics, with its antimaterial particle and antimaterial world. The complete work, Easy Journey to Other Planets, was a 15,000-word manuscript, and he showed it to Hitsaran Sharma of Radha Press, but he didn't have enough money to get the little book printed. So do I continue one more paragraph, or?
Yeah, you can stop here, Prabhu. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's interesting to know that now there's a lot of hype around the fact that India's reached the moon. Yeah, apparently for those of you who didn't know. Anyway, quite relevant paragraphs from the Lilamrita. So we'll get started with the Bhagavatam class. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 4th canto, chapter 22. And chapter 22 is entitled Prithu Maharaja's meeting with the 4 Kumaras. And we're reading from, I believe, text 52. So I'll read the Sanskrit. Griheshu Vartamanopi Sasam Raja Shriyan Vitaha Nasajatendriyarteshu Niraham Matir Arkavat. Griheshu Vartamanopi Sasam Raja Shriyan Vitaha Nasajatendriyarteshu Niraham Matir Arkavat. Griheshu Vartamanopi Sasam Raja Shriyan Vitaha Nasajatendriyarteshu Niraham Matir Arkavat. Okay, so we'll go to the word for word. Greheshu, at home. Pratamana, being present. Api, although. Sa, Kinkritu. Samraja, the entire empire. Triya, opulence. Anvita, being absorbed in. Na, never. Sajjata, being attracted. Indriyat arteshu, for sense gratification. Ni, no. Aham, I am. Mati, consideration. Arka, sun. Vat, like. The translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Sai Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So translation. Maharaj Prithu, who was very opulent due to the prosperity of his entire empire, remained at home as a householder. Since he was never inclined to utilize his opulences for the gratification of his senses, he remained unattached, exactly like the sun, which is unaffected in all circumstances. Purport. The word greheshu is significant in this verse. Out of the 4 ashramas, the brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas, only a grihastha or householder is allowed to associate with women. Therefore, the grihastha ashrama is a kind of license for sense gratification given to the devotee. Prithu Maharaj was special in that although he was given license to remain a householder, and although he possessed immense opulences in his kingdom, he never engaged in sense gratification. This was a special sign that indicated him to be a pure devotee of the Lord. A pure devotee is never attracted by sense gratification, and consequently he is liberated. In material life, a person engages in sense gratification for his own personal satisfaction. But in the devotional liberated life, one aims to satisfy the senses of the Lord. In this verse, Maharaj Prithu is likened to the sun, Arkavat. Sometimes the sun shines on stool, urine, and so many other polluted things. But since the sun is all-powerful, it is never affected by the polluted things with which it associates. On the contrary, the sunshine sterilizes and purifies polluted and dirty places. Similarly, a devotee may engage in so many material activities, but because he has no desire for sense gratification, they never affect him. On the contrary, he dovetails all material activities for the service of the Lord. Since a pure devotee knows how to utilize everything for the Lord's service, he is never affected by material activities. Instead, by his transcendental plans, he purifies such activities. This is described in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Sarva Padi Vinirmuktang Tatpare Parat Vena Nirmalam. His aim is to become completely purified in the service of the Lord without being affected by material designation. Om Vyanitamrandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshura Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sabi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I'll just read the translation one time. Maharaj Prithu, who was very opulent due to the prosperity of his entire empire, remained at home as a householder. Since he was never inclined to utilize his opulences for the gratification of his senses, he remained unattached, exactly like the sun, which is unaffected in all circumstances. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to say something. I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that a lot of you on the call are probably, well, very, very likely, much more senior to me in terms of spiritual advancement and even age. So I'm hoping that by your blessings, I may be able to say something that's beneficial. And yeah, please, at the end, share any reflections, comments, or corrections you may have. Hopefully I can benefit and improve the service. So to start off, I just wanted to give some context for the particular verse that we were looking at today. So in the course of studying the Srimad Bhagavatam and using various study guides by devotees, you get to see that within certain chapters, there are certain themes that are reiterated over and over again. And within certain chapters, there are also certain sections. So certain verses are grouped together. They create a section, and each section is informing us of a particular idea of concept. And Prabhupada, within the purports of a particular section, he also elaborates on what the verses are trying to say. So the verses of this chapter, 49 to 55, they're focusing here on the glories of King Prithu. And specifically this verse focuses on the fact that despite having so much opulence, and despite being obviously in a very opulent position, very wealthy position and influential position as the emperor of the world, he was unaffected by material contamination. So, of course, this is a very interesting phenomenon, because one may look at a person like Maharaj Prithu, someone who's very wealthy and in a position of leadership, and question how that's actually possible. How can a person be seemingly so immersed in material activities, have so much opulence, yet be unaffected? So it's a natural question to ask, because in the contemporary environment, the modern age, we look at people with such situations. In the West, for example, you have celebrities and you have government leaders themselves, and naturally, due to their position, they're granted lots of wealth, lots of privileges that the general public aren't. They may look at them, and it's more often than not than we see that those who are wealthy and have influence definitely aren't liberated. No, they're actually not only entangled in material existence, but a lot of the time, when you look at their habits and their lifestyle, actually you can see that their material opulence.
Good. Thank you for letting me. I forgot, sorry.
All right, should I continue? Okay, I'll continue. So we look at the habits and the lifestyle, a lot of the rich and famous people of today, and we can see that the opulence that they have has actually degraded them 9 times out of 10. Specifically in the West, you can see this with a lot of celebrities. So again, naturally, when we see a person, whether it be in the Bhagavatam or in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, having so much wealth and opulence, we may subconsciously think, how is it possible that they can maintain their Krishna consciousness in such a situation? At least speaking for myself, when I hear about these personalities and I think about, put myself in their position, I think I wouldn't last very long, in that situation without becoming degraded and full of myself, proud. And not only we may have this particular doubt, but the Bhagavatam itself, it gives the account of King Priyavrata, who some of you may know comes up in the 5th canto. And he himself, he also had this fear of becoming entangled. For those of you who have read the 5th canto, you know the story. King Priyavrata, he was actually the elder brother of King Uttanapad. King Uttanapad, as we know, was Dhruva Maharaj's father. And he was actually the rightful heir to the throne after Swayambhuva Manu. But for his own reasons, he chose to perform austerities from the very beginning of his life. And when you read about his description, you get to see that he was at a very elevated state of Krishna consciousness. He was fully surrendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And under the instruction of Narada Muni, he was actually going to remain a Naishtaka Brahmachari for the rest of his life and fully engaged in the service of the Lord. But circumstances had it that he was required to take up the throne. So he was approached by his father, Swayambhuva Manu, and Swayambhuva Manu asked him, you are the eldest son, and the situation is such that we need you to take up the royal duty of being the emperor of the world. So given the position that King Priyavrata had reached in his Krishna consciousness, and from the advice that Narada was giving him, obviously his first instinct was to reject that particular opportunity. Why? Because at least from first impression, he could see that being put in that particular situation could jeopardize his Krishna consciousness. Naturally, being made the emperor of the world, he would have so much opulence, again, so much influence. He'd obviously have to get married as well. So, of course, he was hesitant to be put in that particular position. But because there was such a great need for someone to take up the throne at that particular time, Lord Brahma, who was in charge of managing universal affairs, making sure everything was in order, had to come down. And as we know, Lord Brahma was the father of Swayambhuva Manu, and he was the grandfather of King Priyavrata. So Brahma, he imparted to him lots of advice in the matter. And there's a string of verses where you can hear Lord Brahma's advice. But essentially what he told him was that for someone who engages their senses in Krishna consciousness completely and wholeheartedly, whatever position that they find themselves in, they will never be contaminated. Whether that be in the Grihastha ashram, whether that be in the Brahmachari ashram or the Sannyasa ashram. Whether you be rich or poor, or in heaven or in hell, as long as you engage your mind, your senses, in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, you will never be contaminated. So in that way, there's nothing to fear. My spiritual master, he speaks about this way of being, so to speak, and he gives it the title Bhakti mysticism. So he always explains this is the mysticism of Bhakti, in the sense that you can be, as Jesus Christ puts it, in the world, but not of the world. The analogy is given, it's like being submerged in the ocean without getting wet. So a person who is completely Krishna conscious, they can be in the material world, which inherently is contaminating and inherently has the potential to degrade a person, especially one who is engaged in so many various material activities and duties, but still be unaffected consciously. So how is that? Again, it's not a person's circumstances that necessarily determine their state of consciousness or whether they're liberated or conditioned. It's how they use their mind and senses. So if they use their mind and senses in the service of the Lord, then their state of consciousness is kept safe, protected, or clean, in other words. So therefore, that's one of the differences between a liberated soul and a conditioned soul, is how they use their senses, and ultimately how they use their senses determines their state of consciousness. We also have the example of one of the previous acharyas, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And as we know, he was very much in the world, while he did take time for achieving solitude, for taking time to chant and do his own personal service to the Lord, within his householder life, he was very busy. As we know, he was the government magistrate of his particular region. And not only that, in the course of his life, he married twice and he had 10 children. So someone who sees that externally, they may wonder, how can a person who's so involved in the world ever hope to become, detached? But as we know, it's also said that he had said when he was inside his home and he performed arti with his family members, his whole household would turn into Goloka Vrindavan. So as well as that, again, we know he was one of the previous acharyas in our line. So what does that say? Again, seemingly someone may be involved in material activities, but if their mind and senses are engaged properly and their state of consciousness is therefore kept protected, they can be completely liberated from their situation. So this comes from the understanding that whatever a person does possess, whether a lot or whether little, is actually all the property of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As we hear in the Bhagavad Gita, Bhaktaram Yagyatapasam, Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. So Krishna explains Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, he is the proprietor of all the planets and the demigods. So someone with that understanding, obviously, they attempt to use whatever they have been given for the pleasure of the proprietor of Krishna, ultimately. On the other hand, you might have someone who is a renunciant, at least by label or by occupation, but it's not necessarily the case that they're always liberated. So we have the example in the Shastra. A couple came to mind, but one in particular, Vishwamitra Muni. At least for a period of time, he made a great attempt to become a Brahmana. As we know, he was actually a Kshatriya by caste, but due to disagreement with Vishwamitra Muni, he decided to try and acquire the same Varna as Vishwamitra Muni, become a Brahmana. So he took himself away from all of his kingdom, his opulence, and performed severe austerities. So his intention wasn't for service. His intention was actually for his own personal gain. He wanted to become a powerful Brahmana, because at that time, Brahmanas, they wielded great power, which made the powers of Kshatriya look extremely lame and inferior. Externally, he was renounced, and as we read in the purport of the Bhagavad Gita, he took to austerities for 60,000 years. It's not a normal feat. And as you can read also in this history of his life, his austerities were so severe that actually, again, it disturbed the universal balance in a similar way to the austerities performed by Hiranyakashipu. So he brought himself to a very elevated position in one sense, but then when he was tempted by Menaka, as we know, it didn't take much to make him fall down. So while he may have detached himself from his kingdom and become very renounced, austere, and perform great penances, because of not being engaged in the service of the Lord, he fell down from his position. It's quite often that someone might see someone in the renounced order and look at them and think, well, they're so detached, so advanced, so sacrificial. But again, we can ask ourselves if we are in that particular order, or we can ask, just question, how is the person using their time? And in general, how are we using our time? Where is our consciousness really at? Where are we putting our focus in life? How are we directing our mind and senses? So again, the point being that what is important is not necessarily our circumstances, our external circumstances, but how we engage our mind and senses and our state of consciousness ultimately. So you may have someone who is a grihasta, and due to being properly situated, they're much more advanced than someone in the renounced order, and vice versa. You know, it really depends on the individual, how they're living their life. So this brings us to the fact that one of the main glories, therefore, of bhakti yoga is that it actually allows us to stay protected even in a very contaminating material atmosphere. What to speak of the fact that we ourselves, as devotees, are practicing in the most contaminated atmosphere, in that of Kali Yuga. So in Kali Yuga, you don't have to look very far to see that the circumstances that we find ourselves in are extremely dire. Probably more so if you're in a Western country, but as we know, the influence of Kali Yuga affects the whole world. But being in a Western country, and for myself at least, having the occupation of trying to spread Krishna consciousness throughout the world, we can see that the situation is very dire, and year by year things seem to be getting worse. The states of people's consciousness are becoming more and more covered by the modes of ignorance. And lifestyles, habits, psychological states, actually all aspects of human life are degrading in quality. So then we have Maharaj Prithu, yes, who's able to maintain his sobriety, be liberated from his material circumstances. But what about us? We're in the most degraded age. So, and as we also know, Maharaj Prithu was the Shakti Vaish avatar of Lord Krishna himself. As well, it may be fair enough that he's able to maintain his position, but what about us? So in the course of reading the King Priyavata Prastime, there was a particular purport by Prabhupada which stood out to me, and it explained how even one who's in Kali Yuga, the darkest age, can actually remain liberated and free from its influence. I'll just read from the purport, just one excerpt. This is Canto 5, Chapter 1, the purport of text 19. So Prabhupada explains, our actual duty is to carry out the supreme order of the personality of Godhead. If we are fixed in our determination to carry out the supreme order of the Lord, we are always secure, regardless of where we are situated, whether in heaven or hell. So he goes on to explain more. Here in the words prakritim bhajasva are very significant. Prakritim refers to one's constitutional position. Every living entity has the constitutional position of being an eternal servant of the Lord. Therefore, Lord Brahma advised Priyavrata, be situated in your original position as an eternal servant of the Lord. If you carry out his orders, you will never fall, even in the midst of material enjoyment. Material enjoyment achieved by dint of one's fruitive activities differs from material enjoyment given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A devotee sometimes appears to be in a very opulent position, but he accepts that position to follow the orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, a devotee is never affected by material influences. It goes on next to explain the situation we found ourselves in as devotees of the Krishna consciousness movement. So he explains, the devotees in the Krishna consciousness movement are preaching all over the world in accordance with the order of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They have to meet many karmis, but by the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they are unaffected by material influences. He has blessed them, as described in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya 129. Kabuna badhibe tomara vishaya taranga. Punarapi e tani pabe mora sangha. A sincere devotee who engages in the service of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by preaching his cult all over the world will never be affected by Vishaya Taranga, material influences. On the contrary, in due course of time, he will return to the shelter of the lotus feet of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and will thus have perpetual association with him. So here is the secret to remaining free from the material contamination of Kali Yuga. By following the orders of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and following the orders of those in the parampara all the way to our spiritual masters, we can stay protected. And I can see this in my own life as well. Again, sometimes it boggles my mind how a person can stay afloat in material existence, stay free from the influence of Maya when things are just, especially in Western countries, just so out in the open. The degradation is just so out in the open. And we go on book distribution and we're engaging with all sorts of people, various walks of life. Some very interesting characters sometimes. And just being on book distribution on Queen Street, you can look around and you can witness some very interesting scenes happening. So without going into any detail, it's a potentially very contaminating atmosphere just to be on Queen Street, let's say, what to speak of some other parts of Auckland. And I've had this experience many times of going out and thinking, man, how does a devotee survive this? But then I do the service and come back and it's just another day, go to sleep, wake up again and do the same thing again. And somehow we stay protected. Actually, there was one instance where we were catering at a particular event. It was I guess you could say a Kali Yuga festival. It was a pride festival, actually, for those of you who know what that is. And basically, it was the epitome of Kali Yuga, this atmosphere that we found ourselves in. And it was just us, a group of brahmacharis, serving prasad to the people. And by the end of it, we managed to survive the incident. And one of the brahmacharis just happened to be speaking to my spiritual master at a later point. And my spiritual master, he asked about how the event went. And he specifically asked, did everyone survive the event? And this particular devotee speaking to him said, yes. And I'm paraphrasing, but I was told that he said something along the lines of, just see how Lord Chaitanya protects you. So how is it that we're staying protected? Again, we're following the orders of Lord Chaitanya. We're trying to share Krishna consciousness with others. The activities that we do, they're sanctioned, they're ordained by the parampara and our spiritual masters. And Lord Chaitanya himself, he explains to the Kurma Brahmana, I believe, this recipe in a very concise way. He says, Yare deko tarikao Krishna Badesh, Amara Agyar Guru Hana Tara E Desh. Instruct everyone to follow the orders of Lord Krishna as they are given in the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. And in this way, become a spiritual master and try and liberate everyone in this land. So in this particular age that we find ourselves in, we can become very much liberated by, in the same way that Maharaj Prithu was, simply by following the orders of Lord Chaitanya. And in doing so, we can stay protected from material contamination in whatever situation we find ourselves in. I'll finish there. And I believe it's now time for questions and comments, reflections.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam.
Dandavat Pranams, Prabhu.
Such a beautiful explanation of the text, and you have broadly explained the two aspects of how this material life is not affecting the spiritual life of the people who are strictly following the devotional service with the example of Priya Brata and your Vishwamitra Muni, to contrast how they work and how it is being shown to the people in general to understand the impact of their consciousness. So the main focus is how you deal with it. And of course, our Bhaktivinoda Thakur has given a very recent and very prominent example to show us, even being in the household life, your determination can be fulfilled. It all depends on your consciousness, how your consciousness is attached to. If it is materially inflicted, then things goes in negative direction. But if it is in the consciousness of Krishna, you can remain in the family life, still you can serve the Lord as an unattached person. So it's very nicely explained. Thank you so much. And how you exemplify from the message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as he said, because of his mercy, and he has given the power to the devotees who are following the Krishna consciousness. That power is that being in the Krishna consciousness, he has given that bliss and blessings so that they remain unaffected, whatever the state they are in, but they will always remain unaffected. So these things cannot be understood by people in general from the outer look. They can only understand if they get associated with. So association tells us with a very important message that only with satsanga this thing can remain intact, and that will keep it alive in the spiritual understanding. And the spiritual life will always be remain enlivened with this association. So this is a great message for all of us, and you have so nicely explained with examples. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much, Prabhu. I'm sure a lot of the listeners on the call today are also following in the footsteps of the likes of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Maharaj Kritu. So I feel like I'm just preaching to the choir, as they say. Yeah, you probably have more realization than me on this matter, but thank you for your elaboration. Was there any other questions on the call or comments or reflections?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Thank you very much for the very nice class and elaborating and giving examples how one can remain detached in spite of living in the material world, and particularly in this age of Kali, which is so contaminated. It is very, very difficult, no doubt about that. But if we remain focused in our spiritual life, and with the instruction we receive from our gurus, which is no other than the instruction of the Lord himself, then we can remain, in spite of our living in this material contamination, we can remain unaffected. In Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 5, verse 10, there is a verse which says that Brahmani adhaya karmani sangam tattva karoti cha lipyote no shopapena padma patram ivamusha. Means just like the leaf of a lotus leaf, it floats in water. Sometimes it's dirty water, but it doesn't touch it. In spite of it is always remaining in water, it is never get wet by the dirty contamination of the water. And it is possible when we always remember that, as you have also pointed out, that everything belongs to the Lord. Ishavashram idam sarvam. Everything belongs to the Lord. We are here to serve the Lord, and if we consider that from the core of our heart, when we can realize it in the real sense, not as a matter of routine, but from the core of our heart, we can realize it and we can act in that spirit, then the contamination of this material world will not touch us. And finally, as you have rightly pointed out, we must be blessing from our spiritual master as well. And for that, as Mr. Chaitanya Prabhu has rightly pointed out, we must be in the company of devotees. Without their mercy and the mercy of the Guru and the Vaishnavas, we cannot remain in the right place. There is, because at every moment there is chance of falling down. It is their help and the mercy of the Vaishnavas and the Gurus and Guru, we can remain steady. And so we should always remember that. If we follow that, and in spite of all contamination of this present life, particularly in this age of Kali, we can remain steady, and focused in our devotional service, and which is our Swarup. If we just remember that this is our constitutional position, we have to stick to that. But with all odds around us, if we remain focused, we will not be deviated from that path. Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for nicely pointing out that point. Hare Krishna.
Well, thank you for your reflection. Yeah, I appreciate the point about how devotee association is very important. And that's the thing that allows us to distinguish between what is material and spiritual activity. Yeah, wouldn't be able to keep going without the association of devotees. So thank you for that point. Was there anything else here on the call? Did anyone else anything?
Yeah, thank you very much for your wonderful class, and your realizations was very eye-opening. Especially, I think I like your point where you said, irrespective of individual circumstances of all the human beings, whatever circumstances be, Krishna actually has given everybody an equal opportunity, as you pointed out, because the time is same for everyone. The 24 hours per day or 12 hours per day is the same for everyone. And you very nicely mentioned that how the person uses the time, that determines his destiny in terms of spiritual progress. I think that really struck me, what you mentioned. Thank you for that point. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Prabhu. Thank you for listening. Was there anything else here? Any other reflections?
So, Hare Krishna Prabhu, it appears there is no other person to make comments. It appears. If anybody else can make it, otherwise we can close the class now.
Okay.
So, पतितानां पावनेभ्यो
वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। हिज ग्रेस मनोभिराम प्रभु की जय। श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। All glories to assembled devotees. Hare Krishna.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and hope to see you all Balaram's Parents' Day.